hi everyone, and welcome to our next installment of Voices in GIS. Thank you all for being here today. Our guest today is Dr. Kimothy Smith. You all have learned about him, but I want to just say a few things about Dr. Smith before we get started for the video. Dr. Smith is a veterinarian. He's a double doctor. He's a veterinarian, a spatial epidemiologist, biodefense expert, and entrepreneur. He earned his Bachelor's of Science in Biochemistry and a Doctorate in Veterinary Medicine, and was a practicing veterinarian in Oklahoma for about a decade before going back to school to Louisiana State University and getting a doctorate in molecular epidemiology. He's had he continues to have a long career. First as a postdoc studying anthrax out of Northern Arizona University, and then was the first chief veterinarian for the Department of Homeland Security. He advised the Secretary of Homeland Security and the department's senior leadership on strategies and emergency response plans for food and agricultural security. He also led the development of a U.S. government-wide strategy to acquire and analyze biosurveillance information obtained from public and private sector organizations to support biodefense, biosecurity, food and ag security, and health protection programs. Since leaving Washington, D.C., Dr. Smith has co-founded McCarthy Smith Consulting and provides professional consulting services in the areas of biosurveillance, bioforensics, biodefense, biosecurity, molecular genetics and diagnostics, and food safety, defense, and security. We are really fortunate to have Dr. Smith here with us today to introduce you to my class, to our class here. This is Applications of GIS. These students are amazing. They're from all sorts of disciplines across the university, from sophomores through graduate students. This is the second course in a two-course sequence in ArcGIS, but really this is one of the core courses in our GIS certificate program.
I'm intimidated. They got some really good questions.
They got some. You all got great. These were great questions. So I'm really excited about this conversation. We'll do it like we've done in the past. I'm gonna have a conversation with Kimothy from the questions that you've provided, and then I'll try and leave about 10 minutes at the end for some additional questions that y'all might have. So,
well, if we run over, we don't have time. I present cards.
Perfect. People ask. Well, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah,
You may. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure.
Yeah. It's just a real honor to have you here. And you provided everybody, and I didn't go through it, your whole history with GIS has been pretty incredible, and you've seen a lot of changes in the technologies that are deployed for doing GIS. So I wondered if you could just start by walking us through some of those changes you've seen, and what do you think have been the biggest innovations that have sort of assisted you in your work that you've seen in GIS over the decades?
Yeah, you got it. First of all, I want to say I'm not a GIS expert. I've just rubbed up against it a lot and found it useful to use. And if you guys back there can't hear me, start doing this, and I'll increase my volume because I'm mad about fading out. You too, but me about it. The first experience I had with GIS was actually a black box. You fed it coordinates, you told it where the field was, and you gave it soil, nutrient, weather, and it would tell you how your cotton was going to grow. And that was back in the 80s, mid-80s. So I've seen it where you're making marks with a pencil on a piece of paper, and not exactly a sextant where you're getting GPS coordinates because we didn't have GPS at that point. But that's one of the biggest actually innovations I've seen, is being able to go out to a corner of a field and take a number of readings, and having software that is dedicated. And the original, you guys, if you know this, forgive me, but the first GIS software, Geographic Information System softwares, were actually CAD/CAM software, which all you need is XYZ. Mm-hmm. And if you think about it, that's what GIS is. But GIS is registered, or to maps and locations, actual locations, whereas CAD/CAM not so much. GPS sure helped bridge that gap, being able to take coordinates in the field. And do you guys know what selective availability is? A few. GPS didn't used to be what it is today. The military developed it and developed a satellite cluster and was actually very concerned about letting it open to the public. And the first GPS devices that were available, the resolution was horrible with it, and it was purposely that. They could flip it on and off. For military, they could get very high resolution, and other people couldn't. But the advent of more friendly software, having Windows interfaces, good graphic user interfaces, not having to be a PhD in geography to understand how to use a GIS program. Just incredible. Of course, it gets a lot of people in trouble, and also by drawing erroneous conclusions or mistaken conclusions, or making mistakes. Being able to include imagery seamlessly within ARC. I go back to the days when ARC couldn't do imagery at all. Raster was just
Rudimentary.
Yeah. So I'll kind of slow down or stop and let you redirect me.
No, that's good. You know, the innovation of being able to really precisely locate things has been huge, and that sort of builds in with the raster capabilities of ArcGIS. Are there any emerging tools that you've seen, maybe in this democratization of geospatial information? Are there any emerging tools that you see coming online now or in the future that you're excited about when it comes to particularly the type of work that you engage in, spatial epidemiology, those sorts of things?
I'm seeing a blurring, believe it or not, I'm seeing a blurring of the lines again between CAD/CAM and GIS. Because in my applications right now, looking at mostly potable water, some high purity waters, think healthcare, heater cooler units for heart lung transplants, those kinds of things. We need to see the schematic of those buildings.
Right.
They may have 13 buildings on their campus or more. They may have 4 campuses across the state. You need to be able to track a lot of this information. And okay, I got lost.
So we're seeing reference systems move from merely geographic reference systems to 3D and in fact 4-dimensional reference systems within buildings where you're tracking things through time. You're getting hyper precise location information.
Yes.
And that's becoming important.
It's becoming very important because most of the opportunistic potable waterborne diseases that I see or have to deal with have a seasonality to them. Because we're mostly getting our water from surface water, and most of them people in the United States. So there's a seasonality to blooms of Legionella, blooms of non-tuberculosis causing mycobacterium. We can go on and ad infinitum. Not all states, communities treat their water equally well. And if you have a bad starting product and don't do a good job, you can spread a lot of disease, make a lot of people sick.
A lot of our students here, everybody's sort of discerning where they want to go in their careers or trying to read the tea leaves on what the future is going to be like. And so students had really good questions about your own path and how much you knew what you wanted to do. I mean, like when you went back to Louisiana State University and got your molecular epidemiology degree, did you envision that you might be going into the federal government and be working in defense?
I had no idea.
You had no idea. Walk us through that. How did that happen? And at any point were you like, oh, I'm finding myself here 5 years after getting your doctorate?
Almost daily.
Yeah.
How many of you have seen Forrest Gump? Oh, yeah. Yeah. Stupid is as stupid does. Being at the right place in the right time and having the right skills in your back pocket. I mean, who knew that cotton farmer veterinarian from southwest Dust Bowl, Oklahoma, knew anything about GIS and satellite imagery. And when I went back to graduate school, I responded to an advertisement for a graduate student to work on modeling schistosomiasis in humans in Egypt. And the model they were using were fasciola hepatica, the liver of cattle, and in South Louisiana. It's a trematode parasite. I had absolutely no idea what I was getting myself into, because I ended up working on fasciola and contributing to that work. And something that we had talked about, definition of a GIS. I can make a GIS with maps and pencil. It's anything you have geo-reference data, and you assemble it to be able to ask questions and do something with it. The GIS that I worked with was in ARC, an early version of ARC, and it was very clunky and cumbersome, but I would go out and I would assemble all of the information, the soil types. We'd sample the soil for fasciola hepatica, and we put all that information, we could ask questions. And that's what a GIS is all about, regardless of the dollars in the software, or whether it's web-based or cloud-based. Sorry.
No, it's okay, but you were talking about how you had these experiences, and you sort of, in a Forrest Gump way, found yourself all of a sudden you're working with the federal government. All of a sudden you're being asked to advise people that were really powerful. What's your advice for some of the students that are in this class that are interested in going to work in geointelligence or going to work for the federal government? Do you have any advice about sort of, I don't know, the skills that they would need, or how to approach that type of work? The soft skills.
The soft skills and how to do that. You ask an unanswerable question.
I know.
But
I know.
I'll try to pull some threads.
Yeah.
I'll try to pull some threads here. I followed my curiosity a lot, even if it didn't always make financial sense, much to my parents' chagrin. They don't argue too much now. Or before they died, they said, I don't know what you do, but I'm glad you do it. Follow your curiosity. I won't say find your passion, follow your passion, but there are some basic skills that you're going to find useful almost with anything you do. Math. And learning GIS software and basic GIS principles, basic principles of geography. I will tell you that my love of geography came when I was from when I was a kid in grade school, and my mom took geography, and I had to help her make maps. That was really fun. But sorry for that little war story.
In grade school.
Grade school. Obviously, your normal computer skills, stay up on technology. If you want an interest in the intelligence community, national security, start investigating those things. It doesn't necessarily mean politics. I want to stress that national security, global security does not equal politics in every case. So you can be concerned with national security and not really care, not be political. Just say that. National Reconnaissance Office is what they used to call it, and they have internships. They have internships you can apply for directly. They have meetings that you can go to. They're not classified. They're on social media, obviously. AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Sciences, they have, if you join, they have internships that will pay to send you to Washington to work in government. And many other organizations have internships. Go there, see if it's your cup of tea. Talk to your federal agencies here in the area. Is that helpful?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
Good. Or you can do like I do. Ask a person in a bar, hey, what do you do? Do you really want to know?
Yeah. And then all of a sudden you end up saying, they say, oh, you know how to make a map? You can make I want to shift a little bit to some of your research and your security work, focusing just on disease, on spatial epidemiology. Students had Emma and Henry. Raise your hand, so he knows who's asking these questions. Go on, yeah, Henry's up there. Had the question about what kind of data you look for when you're looking for a disease. I mean, some of your presentations that I shared with the students focused on maybe genotyping different anthrax specimens, but do you rely primarily on publicly available data? Did you have to do? I know you had to do a lot of the data collection yourself. How accessible are some of these data sets, and is there some useful work that even students could do right now with spatial epidemiological data?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let me kind of answer the last question first.
Great.
Citizen science or DIY is fabulous. I've created a lot of GIS within QGIS software for my own nefarious purposes. My property I own when we were looking at native lands, and got Maureen, my wife, who he works with, started more interest in it. Okay, reel me back to the first part of that question.
The first part of the question was about just what sort of data do you use in spatial epidemiology?
Yeah. Time and space and case definitions are important. It depends on what questions you're asking specifically. If you looked at some of my data, I was doing either match and trace back. So is it genetically related to cases we had in this prairie dog burrow?
Right.
And now we're over in a different colony, or how different are they? How closely related genetically are they? Can we measure the mutation rates of the markers we're using so that we know or can estimate mutation rates and changes in pathogens? And ultimately, you have to know what questions you're asking. You can go fishing, but NIH frowns on that. So does NSF.
Yeah.
So you have to have a hypothesis. The variables that you would be looking for in a geospatial study of COVID-19 would be very different than what you'd look at in anthrax. Anthrax is not communicable human to human, animal to animal. Animal has to acquire spores in just a certain number of them, and then they fall ill and they die, and spores are formed in receding environment. Totally different than COVID. COVID requires one similarity is they both require a living host in order to reproduce. That's one thing, but does your pathogen you're looking at live naturally in the environment, or does it have another host, an alternate host? In anthrax, most cases, or in ungulates, which cattle, deer, things like that, very rarely in humans. It can't happen. So, if I didn't already say it, time is hugely important. It's not just spatial coordinates, particularly if it's in an outbreak or progression of a disease or geographic spread. West Nile virus. We use GIS to track the spread of West Nile virus across the United States, and a lot of dead birds later. It's endemic, but anyway. That was a great question. I wish I could give you a single answer, but...
Well, let's say the prairie dog thing actually captured a lot of people's attention, and mine too, because I've done work in the Southwest as an archaeologist, where we have prairie dogs, and we were told to, watch out for dead prairie dogs, things like that. How'd you go about doing that research? Were you going around and, shooting prairie dogs, or were people, not your sort of thing, or were people sending you dead prairie dogs?
Hey, brothers in Oklahoma.
Yeah, that do that. Yeah. I know.
It was very interesting. We had a general idea. Most of this was on public land, so we had an idea where the prairie dog burrows were.
Got it.
And we were there legally, and in our research, we would identify the prairie dog town, see its extent, and we didn't bother the prairie dogs. We collected their fleas.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
They had lots of fleas.
Yeah.
And you don't want the fleas on you.
Right. And the plague goes flea, it's sort of has this life cycle that goes flea, prairie dog, flea, prairie dog.
Yes.
Got it.
Exactly. And we would breathe on a piece of cotton cloth and stick it down the burrow, and then pull it up and put it in a plastic bag. And the fleas are attracted to the carbon dioxide. And then we take the fleas back to the lab, put them in the freezer for a few minutes, pull them out, and we'd grind them up. And then we do qPCR, quantitative polymerase chain reaction, on them with plague-specific markers and see if they were infected. So we weren't actually testing the prairie dogs.
Got it.
We didn't pick up any dead prairie dogs. So that was a lot of fun. Not for the prairie dogs.
Not for the prairie dogs. On a related note to your comment about time, it really came through in some of the materials that you shared with us. A lot of the maps that you made were had specific periods of time when anthrax had been reported in certain counties, for example. And I think there was one map, I can't remember the years that were in it. It was 100 years of anthrax. And one of the students noted, I think Jaden noted that there weren't many Montana counties that were actually represented in that data set. And she wondered, was that just a reporting thing? Is it just underreporting? And have we seen, what's the sort of directionality of anthrax, especially given climate change? Are we expecting the range of anthrax to expand?
That's a set of fabulous questions. Tell me your first one.
The first one was just about Montana.
Right.
We noticed that there's a lot of ranching in Montana.
However, there's no evidence to suggest that anthrax evolved or has been in the United States for longer than 300 years or so. People brought it here. People brought it likely from either Europe or from Africa, and they brought it in bone meal. When we as a species began making a lot of commercial or artificial fertilizers, we needed a lot of phosphorus, calcium, and there was a rush on gathering bones. And a lot of the bones gathered in southern Africa, the animals died of anthrax, and their spores came and survived and got ground up and put in feed. They got distributed through mills in supplements across the United States. So it could be that Montana didn't import much feed early on when this was first happening, before people became aware of it. I'm actually studying in 1917. In 1890 and 1917, outbreak of anthrax in Hawaii that came over from California from contaminated feed. But I digress. There's a whole lot of factors. Run that by me.
So the question, the next part of the question, I mean, that may indeed answer the question about the distribution of anthrax.
The last part was that it was spread by
climate change.
The cattle trails that helped disseminate it.
Yeah.
But climate change, boy, that's anybody's guess.
Yeah.
The natural cycles of anthrax in the environment is an interaction of soil and soil type, the components of the soil, high calcium, high pH soils.
Okay.
Think breadbasket of the country. Think also deserts without the moisture, and that comes the moisture. You have to have these appropriate moisture cycles to help the spores concentrate so they can get an infectious dose. I won't bore you with all that. If you can tell me what the climate or the rainfall is going to do in a place specifically, actually I can do better than that. Dr. Jason Blackburn at the University of Florida runs the Emerging Pathogens Institute. He was a grad student when I was a postdoc in the lab. He does risk analysis by using GIS, historic occurrence, and soil data and climate data. So,
To try and do some of those projections of where.
To.
Sounds super interesting. But some of those projections of where, if the conditions are right.
He can set up the maps that tell you the basic risk, historical occurrence globally, and then what the likely risk is from the other factors in the model. When you add to that climate components, I don't think he's done it yet.
Got it.
And he was supposed to call me today.
Well, I've got one more question in this section,
Okay.
and it has to do with a slide that you had. The cat is out of the bag.
Wait a minute, how am I doing? Am I doing okay? Stay awake? All right.
The cat is out of the bag. You had a slide that was that showed somebody doing bioengineering in their kitchen, right?
Yeah.
And that was about a decade ago.
Yeah.
And since then, you've actually had the emergence of some technologies like CRISPR. You all have heard of CRISPR technology that have made a lot of headlines.
Yeah.
How is the threat landscape changing given the accessibility of some of these bioengineering technologies, and what can GIS do to help us track that, if anything?
I was with you up to that last.
Yes, up to the last part. Okay, so tell us how the threat landscape is changing.
It's only developing more rapidly and it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
And the cat really is out of the bag because unlike nuclear materials or chemical materials, you can't control the source material.
Right.
Most normal pathogens are out there in the environment if you know where to go get them. Or you can get them from a laboratory. We won't go into that necessarily. But the engineering aspect is you can not exactly start from scratch, but pretty darn close. Now I'll tie it to GIS.
Okay.
Better disease tracking.
Mm-hmm.
Better disease surveillance, and not just looking for one bug and collecting information on what's the flu doing this year, but taking a more holistic, biased approach and looking at everybody out there.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Well, I can imagine that there are models in spatial epidemiology of mutation and sort of natural mutation rates. And if you start seeing patterns that things are changing maybe more rapidly than you'd expect, or something emerges someplace where you wouldn't expect it, then that sort of biosurveillance could be telling you something about people actually doing engineering on these things. Sort of like we use the seismic network to monitor for underground nuclear explosions, right?
yeah. I worked on
Yes.
I worked on a unclassified project, but was funded by the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and that's exactly what they wanted to do, was to place the best instrumentation we could as far out in high-risk places as we could, and make collaborations.
Mm-hmm.
And so we ended up putting a GS Junior pyro sequencer at St. Luke's Hospital in the Philippines,
Mm-hmm.
which, where we put it, it's pretty accessible to all the islands, but they have, little known fact, they have had anthrax in northern Luzon. That's not why we did it, but
Mhm.
in order to monitor any emerging threats. So there's a disease, and don't know if it's virus or bacteria. You can begin, there are protocols you can do to begin doing sequencing and begin trying to diagnose it. Earlier the better,
Mhm.
and then share that information. For God's sake, share the information.
Share the information. And that's something, that was on everybody's minds with COVID-19
Yeah.
over the last 4 years. And
I have to say one thing about
Yes.
that.
Yeah.
Because the United States policy was not to share information with Indonesia, we lost our naval medical research unit there. And said, why would we have you here?
Yeah, if you're not going to share
Yeah.
what you're collecting here
Yeah.
with us.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Right.
I think we learned our lesson.
Well, did we?
We haven't lost any more.
That's good. That's good. So what is the future? What does the future of GIS in public health really look like? Is it a continued democratization of data, an expansion of how we share information?
Within privacy and HIPAA,
Mm-hmm.
sharing of information, de-identified information. But if you're going into public health policy in any way, you're going to have to be able to do some, or at least interact with GIS. You may not have to make the maps yourself, but you're going to have to know what you need to make maps,
Mm-hmm.
and how to interpret the maps, how not to interpret the maps, and some spatial, maybe be familiar with some spatial analyses that are pertinent to whatever bug that you're trying to track.
Mm-hmm. Are there any career fields that stand out as needing an increase in geospatial expertise? I mean, is it all careers, or are there areas that in which you've worked that, like, boy, we need somebody with these skills that students here have in this field?
I can't say any one more than another, because it seems like everywhere I turn there is a spatial and temporal dimension to every bit of data, and if you're going to be dealing with it, you're going to have, again, you may not be the one driving the mouse and clicking it, but you're going to need to know how to do it. But if those are the skills that you've got and that you want to find somebody to utilize them, I don't think you'll have any trouble.
Yeah. I mean, you're an entrepreneur, you're standing up a business right now, you're hiring. I mean, you hire people. What are the skills, you've mentioned several of them, I'm sure, but what are the skills that you're really looking for as an employer in this space?
In this space specifically, I'm looking for a blend of data science expertise as well as GIS, meaning that they can go seamlessly from looking at and analyzing large data sets into making me a map or doing the spatial analysis that I need.
Yeah.
I used to do that kind of thing. I don't do it anymore. I'm not qualified.
Good.
But that's the big one. Another aspect is those people taking water samples. They need to be able to interact with a map.
Yeah.
And make decisions, because if you have 21 places you've got to go collect 100 samples from, then you need to be able to be a little bit more efficient. So, and maybe that's not a great example.
I think it's a fine one. Yeah. What sort of questions have you all come up with during this conversation? I appreciate your attention to this. I'm sure there are many. Don't be shy. Yeah, that's always the way it is.
I have one. You brought up math. It's like a really, really important skill to have in general. But you mean more just a really, really sharp level of quantitative reasoning, or actually advanced knowledge, like higher levels?
Yeah, you're right to call me out on that. And it depends on what you're going to do, what direction specifically that you want to go. I threw myself at Calculus 2 several times before I accepted a C and went on. That said, I've worked with I've helped teach myself with the use of software, how to do Poisson regressions and I'm working with so I actually have a quant that works for me. He's a Wall Street Journal quant, and he's a trip. He is, this is fun, since you asked that, I'll keep it short.
No, go on. The field of being able to determine accurately the limit of detection and the limit of quantification of molecular assays is horribly behind. And we're working with him to use machine learning to be able to most accurately estimate them. And it's pretty wildly successful. We're getting the attention of people looking at eDNA of threatened and endangered species. Environmental DNA.
Environmental DNA. So they'll go out and collect a water sample and look for any trace of threatened and endangered, and then try to estimate quantities. I see heavy nods back there. And so we're working with USGS and maybe USD and CDC is very interested in that too. So it depends on what you're doing.
Yeah.
But
No, thank you. Thank you.
One of the things that I'm hearing you say, though, is that having some of those quantitative reasoning skills, and even more just a understanding of the vocabulary, being able to speak to the quant that works with you,
yeah.
and understand, both what he can give you and what you might need.
Sometimes it takes my bioinformaticist to interpret a little bit. Usually going that way.
Yes,
instead
yeah.
of coming this way.
Yeah.
I'm curious for the folks in here who want to work, who may or may not work for the feds in the future. What was it like having and gaining top secret clearance, and did that affect your daily life at all?
It was a wonderful experience. Sometimes you're a little disappointed when you find out what they really have classified.
That's
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty invasive. It's pretty invasive and limiting. You know, I've seen people who have done incredible things get clearances. Don't lie. Just don't lie. Don't make you swear you'll never do it again, and all kinds of things. So, yeah, I gave him a not too long ago. Yes. Oh, last thing.
Yeah.
I'm a real generalist, by the way.
Yeah.
It may seem like I have expertise. I have a little bit of expertise in a few things, but I'm really curious. I want to know something about everything.
Mhm.
So that's what's gotten me in a lot of trouble.
It's gotten you pretty far. Would you working for the government, would you do it again? I mean, like if you were starting over, if you got a rerun, and you know what you knew now, would you go and be the chief veterinarian?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Washington, D.C. is a meat grinder in terms of hard people doing hard things and asking hard questions. But it's a tremendous experience. And I went to Washington, D.C. I'm going to be really, you know, as I went from doing all the work at the bench myself to directing the small lab and then writing grants and proposals, but getting the opportunity to turn around and control almost $400 million portfolio and direct the science based on requirements, that was exciting to do that for a while. It's not an ego thing. It's just, you know, you always say, well, that's a stupid thing to do. Why don't they do that? You can do a little bit of that.
Yeah.
And answer for it. I didn't like testifying in front of Congress. That was not fun.
Because that is an ego thing for
them.
Yes. Other questions? We still got yes.
Oh, I'm just curious. What like when you say testifying in front of Congress, was that for like projects that you have to do? Like.
Yeah. The first time, I'll tell you about the first time I testified before Congress. I became the acting director for the National Biosurveillance Integration Center. None of the other agencies outside of Homeland Security liked it. It was a very unpopular thing to do. I got the directorship, and when Congress summoned someone to come up and talk about it and tell them why we hadn't done everything already, my boss said, I think you need to go do this. And so I had to go and talk about it. It's actually public record. So if you search INBA's Kimothy Smith testimony, you'll see before the House Homeland Security Committee.
And what was that like? I mean, we see these sort of testimonies portrayed in movies, but what was it like to be there and be talking about your program? Did you feel like you were on the defense, defending the work that you were leading, or?
Well, the difficulty about it is, okay.
Yeah.
I was answering for not only my own work, but a lot of other people's work.
Mm-hmm.
And I couldn't say that wasn't me.
Right.
So you're put up and you have to answer all the questions. You have to give the progress reports. You have to give the projections into the future. And half of them up there want to beat you up and make you look like an idiot. And they're going to do it. You might as well let them as best you can. And then the others are going to support you. It's where politics meets science, which is never good.
I guess I'd like to hear a little more about, now that you're out of the government and doing consulting work, like what types of groups do you do consulting for, and what does I realize that consulting's all over the place, so there's not going to be like one day-to-day routine, but like what sorts of things do you find yourself doing, or the people under you doing in support of that?
That's a great question. When I first left, I actually went to work for a defense intel contractor and did pretty much more of the same for a while, and then rolled into doing consulting full time. At first, as most government employees do, I leveraged my Rolodex, right? You're able to get access, and you're able to explain to people how to deal with government. It's amazing how many people, even that are in government, have absolutely no idea how government works. The budget cycles, any one time you're dealing with 5 years of budget and how things happen. You can't just hire people or fire people. Help me out, where was I with that?
Just about sort of now that you're doing consulting work, what
Thank you.
of the kind of people you're working with?
Yeah, so after phasing out of that and explaining to people, I did more technical issues. So worked with people that wanted to develop handheld qPCR devices or very large qPCR devices that you could walk away and leave them for a month. Going after government contracts and helping them technically with that and doing some advising, getting more into the vision sciencey stuff, which is probably my strength, and enjoying doing that. These days, my consulting has pulled back, and I'm actually doing consulting outside of McCarthy and Smith for a company called Gordon and Rosenblatt. And that can be anything from waterborne pathogens to, like I mentioned, there was a 1917 outbreak in anthrax, which has become legally relevant again. Who didn't? So I get to work on that. The types of people, all over the map. Coming out from being a Fed does give you a unique perspective if you do take the time to understand government a bit. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, how does the data change from working with a government agency and the data that you can get from the government and then going to your own contracting? How do you get that data now? Is that through private sectors or public information?
That's a fabulous question. When I was in government, nobody wanted to give me data at all. The only data I could get was classified. But a lot of that was political. There's a tremendous amount of data within the government. And under the Obama administration, and I think the tendency to open data more, make it more accessible. NIH you have to, NSF you have to, and government collect the data. I think that's a wonderful trend. The thing I know about my own data that I'm collecting and that my people are collecting in the field is I get to control it. I can collect it to the quality that I specify, which is really nice. Don't get me wrong, I'll use OPD, other people's data all the time. But it's nice when you can control. When I've got over 1,000 now data points from a single facility that are high quality, that's high quality data. And I'm collecting it on the client's nickel, which is kind of fun. Get you research on the side.
And I imagine that it also can be pretty demanding. One of the things that we've talked about in this course a lot is just the transformation in sort of basic geospatial reasoning and accessibility that we've seen over the last 20 years. First, when people started having MapQuest in their car or whatever, and then moving towards us all having access to maps constantly. There's almost an assumption now about data being geospatial. Have you found people are more demanding in terms of your work, of that sort of geospatial intelligence?
I'm more demanding.
You're more demanding, yeah.
Yeah, and the people who are top in the industry are realizing this, and they're beginning to collect it through the consulting side, but possibly also through the water pathogen side. We're talking to some pretty large companies that have done a terrible job of curating their own data, and everyone's becoming aware. So with my business partners, we talk very openly that the most lucrative part about all of our enterprises here is what we can do with the data. When we collect, from several 100,000 locations, repeated measurements, and then occurrence of detections of pathogens and disease, and it's pretty fun. And then put a quant onto that.
Yeah, who can do all sorts of things.
Roberto's great.
I think we've got time for one more question. If anybody has a burning one.
I have a question. So you've kind of talked a little bit about, the intersection of science and policy, and how you, don't really care for politics too much. I tend to agree, but as you know, a leader in the federal agency, how do you think about science informing policy? And let's say you had, done some research, come to a conclusion, provided a suggestion to policymakers, and it falls on deaf ears. What's that like?
No, miserable. Horrible. I want to go home and cry. All joking aside, I was trying to be silly. It feels terrible. And I think if I can take it from myself, maybe too, the climate change research community.
Mhm.
We've done a crappy job of communicating effectively. People who are not scientists, people who do policy as a living, perhaps, telling them more science doesn't usually get it. I don't mean lie to them. I don't mean water it down or, make pablum. But you have to find an effective way to, what do we say now, meet them where they are,
Mhm.
I guess. Understand who you're talking to and craft that message. So you have to be a communicator. You can't only be a PI or a scientist. If you can't tell somebody about it, you can't, they can't understand it, then you didn't do it, as far as they're concerned, which is terrible. Anyway, I give you hope, though. If we communicate science effectively, people can listen and can be shown. It does work. Even though I had a lot of people in government that hated me and didn't want to share the data with me, they couldn't argue with me.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for listening.
This is just good.